Hi, everyone. Welcome to our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar. Today, we're talking about how to write a research grant. And to get us started, I'd like to introduce you to the team. First, Dr. Sanal Katyal is an assistant managing editor at Sage, where she performs various editorial duties in different OA titles, including managing peer review. Sanal has a postgraduate in dentistry from the ITS Center for Dental Studies and Research in Ghaziabad, and previously received funding from the Indian Council of Medical Research to study oral squamous cell carcinoma. Sanal is based in Delhi. Next, Robert Tinkle, PhD, is a publishing editor for Sage, managing a suite of journals in humanities and social sciences. He earned his PhD in English literature from Johns Hopkins University, where he also served as associate editor for the journal English Language History and directed the JHU Writing Center. Next, Dr. Karen Jennings Mathis is an assistant professor of psychiatry and human behavior in the Warren Albert Medical School and research scientist at the Center for Behavioral and Preventative Medicine at the Miriam Hospital. Her program of research focuses on risk and protective mechanisms that underlie health risk behaviors among Black and Brown populations. She has received several awards and recognition for her leadership and research and is active in leadership positions on various committees for the Academy of Eating Disorders and American Psychiatric Nurses Association. Next, Dr. Grace Rivera is an assistant professor in the psychology department at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Rivera's research is guided by an interest in the life theories people hold about selves and systems. She uses perspectives from existential and cultural psychology in her work and lay theory about true selves and authenticity, American meritocracy, and systemic racism. Dr. Rivera has received funding from the U.S. Department of Justice. And last, my name is Sean Skarsberg, a senior marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, making it easier for everybody. Throughout the webinar today, please do send us your questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A chat box. Feel free to send anything you've got to our panelists there. We'll do the best that we can to answer as many questions as possible live, but for any that we cannot address live, we will follow up. To get us situated first today, I'd like to share this timeline of the author journey. This shows the typical stages an author goes through from the early stages of securing funding all the way through publication and article promotion. We have a number of webinars covering the different topics across this timeline, so we do encourage you to go back and watch recordings and also to sign up for future webinars that may cover other areas of interest. And with that, I'm happy to pass this over to Sanal.
Thank you, Sean, for the wonderful introduction, and I welcome all the participants. So to begin with, what is a grant? So basically, research grants are a cornerstone for advancing sciences and addressing societal challenges. What kind of challenges? Basically, they provide the financial support necessary for innovative projects that can lead to meaningful discoveries or solutions. So, not just funding, they also validate the significance of your research, helping to establish credibility in your field. Additionally, successful grant writing can open doors for collaboration, elevate your career trajectories, and create long lasting impacts both scientifically and socially. So, mastering grant writing ensures you can effectively compete for these valuable opportunities. So, here are the basic components of a grant proposal. They need to be followed in the following order. Number one is cover letter. You should write a professional cover letter introducing yourself, the purpose of the proposal, and the funding opportunity you are applying for. Then you have to provide a concise summary of the project, highlighting its significance, objectives, and expected outcomes. In introduction, you have to clearly state the problem or research question that the project aims to address. You have to provide relevant background information, context, and any previous work in the field with recent references. Then you have to define the specific objectives of the project and outline the research questions you aim to answer. Then comes methodology, very important. You have to describe the research design, methods, and approach you will employ to achieve the project objectives. You have to include details such as data collection, statistical analysis techniques, and any ethical considerations. You have to be realistic with the timeline or work plan outlining the major project activities, milestones, and anticipated completion dates. Then comes budget. Very, very important. I will talk about budget section in detail later in this slides also. So you have to prepare a detailed budget that includes all the costs associated with the project, including personnel, equipments, supplies, travel, and any other relevant expenses. Be sure that your budget is reasonable, justifiable, and aligned with the funding opportunity guidelines. You have to describe the methods you will use to evaluate the project's progress and measure its impact. Thoroughly explain how will you assess the outcomes and dissemination strategies to share the results. Then also you have to highlight any collaboration, partnership, or support that you have to secure or you intend to secure in future to establish for the successful implementation of the project. Also, you have to address the project's long-term sustainability beyond the funding period. You must explain how you plan to maintain and continue the project's impact and activities once the funding ends. Um, Very important, you have to demonstrate your team's qualifications. So capacity and expertise is very important. You have to explain their qualifications, expertise, and track record in the field, emphasizing their relevance to the project. Then references, you should include a comprehensive list of references and citations to support the background, methods, and rationale of your proposal. But mind you, the references should be recent enough. Then in appendices, you have to attach any additional documents such as letters of support from your mentor, your institution, university, CVs of key personnels, institutional endorsements, or relevant supplementary material. After all this is done, you have to carefully review your proposal for clarity, coherence, and grammar. Please make sure it adheres to the formatting and submission guidelines provided by the funding organization, because every funding organization have their specific guidelines. Once it is done, submit your proposal by the deadline specified in the funding opportunity guidelines. Double check that you have included all the required documents and followed the submission instructions. Please remember that the specific requirement and components of a grant proposal may vary depending on the funding organization and the nature of the project. So it is crucial to thoroughly read and understand the guidelines provided by the funding agency and tailor your proposal accordingly. Please do not hesitate in seeking feedback from colleagues or mentors experienced in grant writing to further enhance your proposal. Next slide. So, a compelling narrative is the backbone of your grant proposal. You should start by emphasizing why your research is significant and how it addresses a critical need or gap. So, you have to clearly outline your research plan, including methodology, anticipated outcomes, and potential challenges with solution. Because to capture reviewers' attention, you have to consider using storytelling technique. Set the stage with a context that resonates. Include the highlight, the innovation of your approach, and draw a clear path to impactful results. Your narrative should flow logically and be free of jargon, making it accessible and engaging for reviewers from diverse backgrounds. See, the person reading your grant proposal may not be a subject expert, and you want to make sure anyone who is reading the proposal will be able to understand your goals in research. Okay. One of the most critical components of a grant proposal is clearly defined research objectives. These objectives should address a well-identified gap or challenge in your field. Ensure your objectives are SMART. By SMART, I means SMART. S stands for specific enough to be clear. M for measurable to track progress. Achievable within the grant scope, relevant to your discipline and societal needs. Lastly, time bound with defined milestones. It's equally important to demonstrate how your goals align with the mission and priorities of the funding agency, which significantly increases your chances of approval. So whatever questions you plan to evaluate, make sure that you set SMART objectives. You have to ask yourself, specific, do the objectives specify what is to be achieved? Measurable, can data be collected that will test whether the objective have been met? Achievable, is it realistic to test this objective? Can the necessary data be collected within the time and budget constraints? Then you have to ask, are the objectives relevant to the project? Have the set objectives that can be measured within the time frame of the project? Next slide. Yeah. Although the impact agenda is a relatively new development in academia, the wider notion of research impact has always been an important aspect in funding proposals. Researchers are expected to articulate the potential benefits and implications of their research in their funding applications. Therefore, the role of impact in a research proposal is key, as funding is far more likely to be provided if the proposal clearly identifies the expected benefits of the research and how those benefits can be achieved. So the proposal structure varies with the individual funders. So when writing your proposal, it is imperative to check the requirements of the funder you are applying to. However, there are a number of general features of effective impact activities central to all grant writing processes. Your proposal must make it clear that impact-related activities are integral to the research project and not simply bolted on at the dissemination. Therefore, strong proposals will indicate a mindset towards impact in which research and impact are intertwined. So, user consultation in the planning and strategizing for impact will be included. And what activities such as training workshop or event designed for specific user group will be outlined. So think about the key messages of your research and research impact and emphasize these throughout the proposal. Also, you can identify your research impact objectives. A typical set of objectives identified by the ESRC, Economic and Social Research Council, are: number one, build awareness of the project among a defined audience. Number two, secure the commitment of a defined group of stakeholders to the project aims. Number three, influence specific policies or policymakers on key projects. And lastly, encourage participation among researchers or partner bodies. So this ESRC also outlines SMART objectives. Articulating and defining your impact objectives will make things clear that impact-related activities are fundamental to the research project. So as most of the funding is provided by for projects, the impact activities must relate to the work being funded. So this can be more general for the personal fellowships and awards and should not describe activities which related to previous work or wider university responsibilities. Evidence of a strong track record is wider engagement is useful, but the focus should be on the research for which funding is sought. In order to achieve that, an embedded strategy and facilitate a process of producing outputs that are usable by your partners. These should be evidence of a developing relationship between you as the researcher and the stakeholders. So these stakeholders can be anyone, the organization, groups, departments, structure, networks, or individuals. So the involvement of these stakeholders of beneficiaries from the outset builds feasibility into the proposal. So in bridging research and impact, stakeholder analysis can be used to identify all parties engaged in conducting the research, those who make or implement policy, and the intermediaries between them. So it can help define a way to engage stakeholders so that the impact of research can be maximized. Also, you should consider who needs to know about the research, what their positions and interests are, and how the research should be presented and framed to appeal to them. You should also think about their ability to influence the final outcome of your research. So, quick tips that can help you develop relationship. First and foremost, maintain contact with people. who have met through electronic or face-to-face mechanism. It can be useful to schedule how often you intend to communicate with your contact and the key messages you want them to know. Also, encourage informal as well as formal interaction. For example, propose that people who generally only meet each other at formal business meetings have a social gathering. Be sure that your objectives for relationship building are clear, because you are seeking someone's short term, you are not seeking someone's short term input. You are looking for longer term collaborations. Also, be prepared to set aside some time in your work calendar to enable relationship building to take place. See, your proposal should reflect commitment to both academic and non academic impact. Even if the academic is the natural outcome of the research, but you make sure that you focus on the knowledge exchange and impact rather than simple dissemination. All right, structuring the budget section of the grant proposal requires careful planning and consideration. Here are some steps to effectively build the budget section. Number one, understand the guidelines. You have to familiarize yourself with the funding organization's guidelines and the instructions regarding the budget section. Please pay attention to any specific budget forms or templates provided and any limitation or restriction on the budget items. Consider any limitation or restriction imposed by the funding agency. Some agencies may have specific funding caps, limitations on certain budget items or guidelines regarding cost sharing. So make sure that your proposal aligns with the agency's requirements. The budget should align with the scope and scale of the project. Consider the objectives, activities, and expected outcomes of the research. Please ensure that the proposed budget is sufficient to support the project's needs and requirement. Then you have to identify direct cost. Start by identifying the direct costs associated with your research project. These are expenses directly attributable to the project, such as personnel salaries, equipment, supplies, travels, participation incentives, etc. So make a comprehensive list of all the items you anticipate needing for the successful completion of the project. Then you have to develop a line item budget. Create a line item budget that lists each expense category separately, such as personnel, equipment, supplies, travels, etc. For each category, specify the quantity, unit cost, and total cost. So be sure to include a brief justification or description for each budget item to explain why it is necessary for the project. Then very important, you have to justify your budget. Provide a detailed justification for each budget item, linking it directly to the project activities and objectives. You have to explain thoroughly how each item contributes to the successful implementation and completion of the research. Clearly articulate the necessity and relevance of each expense. After that, use realistic cost estimates. So, gather realistic cost estimates for each budget item. This may involve reaching out to vendors, suppliers, or service providers to obtain accurate pricing information. Use current market rates or the quotes to ensure that your budget is realistic and aligned with the actual costs involved. Strive to find a balance between an ambitious budget that adequately supports the research goal and a realistic budget that demonstrates financial responsibility and feasibility. Please avoid overinflating the budget without proper justification. So, in addition to direct cost, some funding programs allow for the inclusion of indirect cost or overhead. These are the expenses that support the overall functioning of the organization, such as administrative cost, facilities, utilities, and institutional support services. If indirect costs are applicable, include them in the budget and follow the funding organization's guidelines for calculating and justifying them. Also, some grant programs may require or allow cost sharing or matching funds from the applicant or collaborating institutions. If this applies to your proposal, clearly outline the source and amount of the cost sharing or matching funds and demonstrate how they will be allocated and utilized. It is also advisable to include a contingency grant, which is also known as reserve fund, in the budget to account for unexpected expenses or changes in the project needs. So, this buffer can help address unforeseen circumstances or emerging opportunities without jeopardizing the project's progress. Double check all calculations and ensure that the budget is accurate and it is consistent throughout the proposal. Please make sure that the total budget aligns with the funding amount being requested and that there are no discrepancies or errors in the calculations. Ensure that the cost estimates for each budget item are realistic and aligned with the current market rate or prices. Lastly, you have to review and revise. Once you have developed the initial budget, review it critically to ensure that it aligns with the project's objectives, it is realistic enough, it covers all necessary expenses. Seek input from colleagues, mentors, or finance professionals if possible to gain additional perspectives or ensure the budget is comprehensive and well structured. Also, follow formatting guidelines. Please adhere to the formatting guidelines provided by the funding organization for presenting the budget section. Use clear headings, tables, and formatting to enhance readability and understanding, but it should be clear. Lastly, please remember the budget section should reflect the scope and scale of the project while providing a clear and accurate financial plan. Be sure to provide sufficient detail and justification for each budget item to convince the reviewers of the necessity and feasibility of your funding request. May I now request Robert to take up from here and provide insider tips for grant submission? Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal. So now that we've gone over some of the really key sections of the proposal, we're going to sort of take a little bit more of a bird's eye view of the application as a whole and share some insider tips for your grant submission. And that's because grant proposals are not just about great writing, although they are very much about that too. Of course, they're also about sort of the preparation that you put into your application as a whole and managing your own application and being as precise as you can in that process. So the first tip that we have here is to make sure that you are following all formatting guidelines meticulously. And that's because each funding agency is going to have its own requirements and its own expectations. So really make sure that you're going through those guidelines and those expectations, making sure that you are, for example, staying within word counts, page counts, even setting the, your font or your typeface to what the agency has requested, if there is such a request, things like this. So just making sure that all that formatting is really in place the way that the agency wants it. The next tip here is to really double check your submission deadline. Missing a submission deadline is kind of one of those mistakes that you can't really bounce back from. So you really want to make sure that you have your calendar laid out, that you can, making sure that you're meeting all deadlines, whether it's the one-time deadline for sort of submitting the final version of the application or any deadlines that are sort of part of the process of getting to that point. And just really making sure that you're checking all those deadlines. If you're able to, building in some buffer periods for any unexpected delays, making sure that you're not kind of pushing things right to the last minute and submitting on deadline, but trying to submit before deadline if possible. And even if all goes smoothly, you can save yourself a lot of headache and mental anguish by not kind of rushing things at the end, right? So just really making sure that you're keeping on top of your timelines for your application. The next, you want to make sure that you're avoiding common pitfalls. These will include things like, for example, vague objectives, or maybe on the other hand, objectives that are kind of too overambitious or maybe unrealistic. So making sure that your objectives are pitched appropriately. You want to avoid, again, as I already discussed, either poorly or incorrectly formatted proposals that don't follow the set guidelines, as well as things like insufficient justifications for your project's feasibility. Remember that your readers are really looking for clarity and they're looking for thoroughness. So make sure that your application is kind of meeting those standards. Last, continually seek feedback from colleagues and mentors who are able to provide constructive feedback. As writers, if you're looking over our own writing and our own projects, you stop seeing it after a while, right? You become too kind of over familiar. So having that extra set of eyes is super important to kind of identify gaps, weaknesses, also strengths, right? Other people telling you kind of what your application is doing well is also really great feedback to have. So just make sure that you're seeking feedback continually as you kind of work through this process. And here we have some even more tips. So I'm going to sort of tackle these column by column. So we'll start at the top on the left here. This is really important. You want to make sure that your application is really explaining and articulating how your research plans are actually going to enable the impacts that you're anticipating. As Sonal covered, funding agencies are really looking at things like impact. They're more likely to fund projects that are able to articulate what kind of impact you anticipate your research having. And in addition to that impact, again, this kind of hits that question of the feasibility of the project, making sure that your plans, your methodology is actually going to realistically enable those impacts that you anticipate. So this is something that you really want to make sure that you're honing in on as you write and then sort of revise and continually revise and update your application and other documents. Next, ensure that you're including things like recruitment, staff, and volunteer time among your costs. These maybe fall into some of those indirect costs that Sonal had mentioned on the budgeting slide. Sometimes it's easy, when it comes to kind of, staffing or kind of, human labor. Sometimes it's easy to forget that these are real costs that are built into these kinds of projects. So just being really aware of kind of some of these more hidden costs, including like the time that you're asking yourself and your team members to put into a project like this is really vital. Next, you'll want to sort of identify evaluation processes that you have in place. So this means sort of as the project is developing, when, let's say you get the grant and you're actually conducting the research, making sure that you have a clear sense of kind of how things are moving forward, what the progress is like, anticipating any kind of expected or unexpected setbacks that may occur. If you have the kind of project where, phase 2 is going to really kind of directly depend on a certain kind of result coming out of phase 1, but let's say you don't get the results that you anticipated from phase 1, you want to really make sure that you are clear about kind of how you're going to approach phase 2 in the event of maybe an unexpected setback or just results that you didn't anticipate. So putting those kinds of guardrails on your own research and being able to kind of articulate, how am I going to get from A to B to C kind of throughout the duration of this project is really important. So building some sense of that into your application will show your reader that you have sort of thought about this and that you have a sense of kind of what the project is going to look like as a whole and kind of how the component parts are going to fit together, including anticipating any potential setbacks. Next, as I said already, seek feedback from colleagues, and I think especially from those who are kind of outside of your own area of expertise. It's actually more likely than not that your reader or just one of the several readers who are looking at your application are not going to be subject matter experts in the same field that you are conducting research in. So it's really key that your application is clear and legible to somebody who is not in your sort of specific area of expertise. To do this, you want to avoid jargon as much as you can. If you do have any kind of jargon or complex terms, you want to make sure that you're explaining what those are to somebody who might not be familiar. What those terms mean, what they entail, what the context is. So seeking feedback from colleagues who are not in your own area can really help you to identify some of those things that might not make so much sense to somebody who's not in your own area of study. Next, and this might seem obvious, but it really is important to bear in mind as you produce your application. Make sure that your team has the full range of personal, professional, and technical skills to actually undertake the research and everything that the research is going to entail. Again, might sound obvious, but it's important to keep in mind that you want your team to not only have that academic background and that research area expertise, but also even the interpersonal skills, right, that are needed to carry out important and kind of sustained and maybe long-term research. So making sure that everyone on your team is going to be able to handle conflict in a productive way, or be team players, and everybody's going to kind of do their part to help move the project forward. And finally, you want to try to provide as much information as you can in your application regarding the specific audiences with whom you intend to engage, and perhaps the audiences that or populations that you're doing research on behalf of. The rationale for your choice of activities, the expected benefits of these engagements, the expected timescale, as well as the expected outcomes and how you might go about identifying and wherever possible, even quantifying those outcomes. Next slide, please. So now we have a submission checklist here. I think this is a good thing to have in mind at the outset as you begin to produce your application. And then this would be sort of a good checklist, I think, to return to when you're kind of nearing the end of your writing and producing your application to sort of make sure that you've addressed all of these points. So the first thing here is just ensuring that you've identified all appropriate partners and end users in the proposal and have provided evidence about how these end users have contributed to the proposal development. Number two, making sure that you're demonstrating a clear understanding of how your research is actually meeting specific end user needs. Excuse me. Number three, ensuring that your letters of support from recommenders are demonstrating their commitment to the project and their kind of excitement and confidence that the project will actually deliver the impact that you are expecting. The people who are writing letters, they're busy too. They do, it sounds horrible, but, they do sometimes forget deadlines or they forget to sort of submit their letter on time. So make sure that you're kind of keeping up with them and reminding them, that they have a letter due. It's also a good kind of rule of thumb to maybe give your letter writer a deadline that is a bit earlier than the actual application deadline. Again, just to kind of build in that buffer in case, they forget or they get busy or something goes wrong. So, if your application is due, September 30th, you might want to tell your letter writer, if you can have this in by the 20th, that's the deadline. So just to kind of build in a little extra time in case, they forget or, something goes wrong there. Number four, are all the proposed impact-related activities appropriate for the project, and is their management suitably considered? So again, kind of coming back to this question of the feasibility of your proposal. And number five, are the impact-related resources that have been requested appropriate for the activities proposed? So again, making sure that we're not only able to achieve the impact we want to achieve, but that we have the resources that are going to be necessary to actually do so, to accomplish that goal. So now you've come to the end of your writing. Your application is, 95% of the way there. So now you're going to want to do a final check just to make sure that everything is kind of copacetic and they're sort of ready to send. So the first thing is to, and again, you should be doing this throughout the process, but continually read and reread your own proposal. Make sure that you're proofreading as much as you can, catching errors, large and small. You want to make sure again that you have your proposal read by as many colleagues as are willing to pitch in and sort of give you feedback. The more eyes on it, the better. Making sure that your messaging is clear and that your arguments are as airtight as possible. A lot of universities and other academic organizations have writing centers or other kinds of writing services. These are, more often than not, capable and more than willing to help you with things like grant proposals. So bringing your draft into a writing center or some kind of writing service is always a good idea as well. Again, to this question of time, make sure that you upload early if possible, or at least, that you're not kind of waiting until the day of the deadline. If you can kind of build as much of a buffer in there as possible. You never know if your local utility company is going to cut the power the day that your application is due, or your internet's going to glitch. It sounds catastrophic and apocalyptic maybe to think about that, but these things can happen. So you want to make sure that you are kind of submitting ahead of time if you can, and just really making sure that everything is in on time. You don't want to miss a deadline. Otherwise, that means waiting till the next application cycle. So really make sure you're staying on top of your time. And finally, be prepared and factor time after submission for revisions. Some agencies will be returning sort of detailed reviews to you about your application. So you want to make sure that you're addressing all reviewer comments. These comments are extremely helpful. And even if a grant does end up being rejected, it's really good to have that feedback, to take advantage of that feedback, good and bad, and use that to reapply. Okay, so now we're going to share some resources and tools with you, and the following slide will sort of go into some of these in more detail with the links that you can access. leveraging these resources can really significantly improve the quality of your grant proposal. Um, there are writing workshops and courses available that are kind of aimed toward grant writing, either maybe through your university or other organization. They're available to you. I would say take advantage of kind of writing resources in general, but especially if you can find one that's geared toward grant writing, that of course will be of great benefit to you as you produce an application. Um, uh, Very large funding bodies like the NIH and NSF have actually a real kind of treasure trove of online resources that are available, including guides, templates, checklists. Again, we'll look at some of these a little bit more detail on the following slide. The NIH even runs a podcast series called All About Grants that I recommend checking out. They've got episodes on all kinds of topics related to the grant writing process and kind of what NIH funds and what they're looking for. So that would be a good resource to check out. That's just available online freely. You want to, of course, also network with other researchers, and especially researchers that are maybe more experienced than you are at your kind of current career level, just to kind of solicit their feedback. They will likely have examples of successful grants, either from themselves or from colleagues. So using your network to its full advantage is also a really great tool for you here. And so again, here we have, and these slides will be available to all of you after the presentation, so you'll be able to access the links from this slide. We have some examples of sample grant applications from the NIH. That's that first link here. This is extremely helpful to kind of see which applications were successful. And what's really helpful about them too is that there are reviewer comments kind of within these examples. So you can see the application and you can also see what the reviewers of that application found to be the kinds of pros and cons of the proposal. So you can really go through and kind of see how the application was read, what the reviewers were looking for, what they liked, what they thought was working well, what they thought maybe were, oversights or potential setbacks in the application. Even those that were accepted, of course, no application is perfect. So you can kind of see, what made the committee hesitate or sort of what they thought could be developed further. So this is a really great resource. And this is the grants from kind of across the full spectrum of grant types. So R1s, R21s, K grants, F grants, the whole range there. So really great resource to benefit from there. We've also provided NSF sample proposals and an NSF checklist. So again, I encourage you to look at those links from the National Science Foundation. There are also, resources like some academic institutions have grant writing workshops or boot camps. So Columbia University, for example, runs a 2-day boot camp for NIH grant writing. I think their next one is in November. So, if you're planning on applying maybe next year, that could be a really good resource to take advantage of. I also finally would just encourage you to reach out. The NIH and NSF both have program officers that are available for guidance. So these are people who are kind of really deeply plugged into the organization, and they're not going to send you feedback on your particular draft. But they will be really helpful in guiding you to let you know kind of how feasible your project is, how good of a match it seems for some of the funding that's available and some of the programs that are soliciting applications. So there are really great resources to take advantage of just in terms of figuring out kind of the fit of your proposal and kind of helping to kind of, again, guide you toward opportunities that might be relevant for you. So I really encourage you to reach out to these program officers at these organizations as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand things off to Drs. Rivera and Dr. Jennings-Mathis. These are two researchers who have been through this process many times and can speak sort of to their own personal experiences with this process. So I think, Dr. Jennings-Mathis, we're starting with you, and I will hand it off.
Thank you so much for your lovely presentations. I do want to say thank you for having me here and for all of the questions that are in the Q&A. Very, very nice questions that are being posed, and hopefully we'll be able to address those that haven't been addressed yet. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the process of applying for funding for grants and the amount of rejection that you will receive. I think that's part of being a scholar and a researcher who's seeking funding. I'm sure some of you, if not most of you, if you've submitted grants and or publications, have experienced a certain level of rejection. And so quite often, the first time you submit an application, it is not going to get funded. And hopefully, depending on the funder, they will provide feedback, and you can help to either improve your application and submit it to another funding call, or to submit it to the same organization for the next call. But with that caveat, sometimes with micro grants or smaller grants, they don't give you feedback. They just let you know if you're funded or not. But usually, if you do receive feedback, it's great, even if you're not funded, to take that feedback and revise the grant that you submitted, and then resubmit it again, if that's possible. And that, it's kind of setting you up to get a strong um, acceptance of being rejected. And so I think the feedback that you receive can be extremely helpful. And that's why it's also very important to get feedback from your peers before you submit your grant. So when you're thinking of your timeline, if it's feasible to seek uh, feedback on what you're going to submit, especially around the science, from your peers, not just those who are in your area of expertise, but even those who are not, so that they can, if they don't know what you're studying, and if you've been writing this grant and this is your passion in your area, quite often you might use language or jump from one topic to the next without going through explaining each step or explaining each topic, because it's just so natural for you. Whereas if you have somebody where it's not their area of expertise reading the grant, they can tell you where they have questions or where things don't make sense. And then that gives you the opportunity to revise it before you submit it for review. I'm remembering that, it's not uncommon or it is quite common for those who are reviewing grants to not be to have expertise in your area. So they might have some knowledge, or they might be an expert in a certain method or one piece of the grant, but they may not be an expert in your specific area. And so you want to make sure you're writing the grant so that they understand what you're doing and your reasons for doing it and why it's innovative and important. I think in regards to finding funding, I see a lot of questions about where can I find, are there any calls for certain grants in certain areas? I think that if you were to look at professional organizations, both in your country as well as internationally, to see if they have any calls for funding. If your governments, if you want to do a quick Google search and put in what your area is to see what research funding is available. There's also databases that exist where you can search and see if you put in certain keywords, you can search and see what funding from very small grants for like $500 to, a couple $1 million is available. Some of them you have to pay for, so you can see if your institution has them, and some of them may be free. So I would say that's a great place to start in regards to determining if there's funding available for whatever you're looking to receive funding for, whether it's to publish or to do a project, or whether it's for your PhD project or for a larger scale implementation project, if you will. There's money out there. It's just a matter of finding where it is. And I think either looking at not-for-profits, foundations that may exist. I think like the Gates Foundation. There's some international and global organizations that do provide funding, depending on your type of research. If you do bench work or wet labs or dry labs, really, it really depends on your research area, and where that funding may be. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it off to Dr. Rivera, and I'm happy to continue to answer questions if indicated.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jennings-Mathis. That was a wonderful overview of some of the things to kind of think about with the grant writing process and where to look for funding, and definitely the the journey of applying for grants and how often we face rejection and have to kind of respond with persistence and editing. And thank you to y'all for inviting me to be on this panel and for the great presentation. I thought it was a really great overview of the grant writing process. And so I thought I'd like to just share a little bit about my journey with kind of pursuing grants and learning about grant writing and some of the strategies that have been really helpful for me. And then I'm super excited to kind of get into some of the specific questions that all of our participants have been posing. And it's really great to see the active Q&A chat as well. So thank you to everyone who's here participating. So for me, my first experiences with grant writing were as a graduate student when I applied for some of those micro grants, those small research grants that were for graduate student work. And so often those would just be for some participant payments, or sometimes it would be grants for travel funding to go to a research conference. And then when I moved into my faculty position, I began thinking about larger grants to try and apply for, thinking about the bigger projects where I need more funds potentially for recruiting participants from the community, for funding graduate students to help work on the projects, thinking of taking that next step to this larger external grants. And so some of the first applications I submitted were to foundations that put out calls for proposals. And so these would often be calls for specific topic areas. And so then you would know, okay, this is a proposal about the science of honesty. And as a psychologist, that was something I was very interested in. So you'd submit a letter of intent, which would be a brief, short proposal, and then you might get invited to submit a full proposal. And that's a nice area to get kind of your feet wet in the grant writing world to get started, because it's a smaller initial product that you're writing up. And then if you get invited to the next stage, you get to do that full proposal. So that was an interesting experience. I wasn't awarded funding through those avenues, but I felt like I learned a lot about the grant writing process. Each one I submitted, I learned, start a little earlier, get more feedback from eyes outside of my field. And then I was able to work with an interdisciplinary team to submit a large grant to the Department of Justice. And that was gratefully, we're really grateful to receive funding for that grant. And we're still in our first year of working on that project. And in that project, I got to work with a team of collaborators who are bringing expertise from a variety of disciplines. And that's been a great experience. And then in terms of, I've also written a proposal as a sole PI rather than a co-PI like that one for the National Science Foundation. Although that wasn't funded, it received some positive reviews, and I was able to learn a lot from that and think about, okay, where do I want to pivot that project? Do I want to kind of resubmit it here or look at alternate funding avenues? And so along that way, I attended a lot of different webinars about the grant writing process. I joined a year-long grant writing cohort where I had a team of other early career researchers who were all working towards submitting their first large proposal. And that was a huge help in keeping me on track, and also having peers from different disciplines able to look over my work. So that's just a little overview of kind of my experience and some of the things that helped me along the way. And I'm happy to move towards the Q&A.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for your continued questions. Before we dive into the Q&A, though, I have an obligatory slide to share about some upcoming webinars for us. So you'll see a list of 5 different webinars that we've got planned for the rest of the year. We have some other webinars that are not pictured here on peer review. So there's lots going on. We're always happy to have more and more participants, and for you to keep coming back. Our next webinar will be on ethics and research integrity, which is obviously a topic of concern across academia. So definitely tune in if you're interested. Noting as well that we have a Sage Informations for Authors page and hub where we have lots of guides and information for you, dedicated support on how to get published, lots of questions. We've got links to all of the webinars that we've talked about. So definitely check that out if you have any questions. And my last plug here is for our new author newsletter initiative. This is going to be a quarterly newsletter that will deploy to anybody who has signed up with exclusive resources on how to get published and how to be an author, as well as you can be the first to know about some of our upcoming webinars. So I'll leave this slide up on the screen here as we start into the Q&A. And as we're talking in the Q&A, please continue to send your questions through. But the first question I've got for our panelists is about storytelling. So what storytelling techniques do you see as essential, and can you provide any examples from your experience?
I'm happy to take on this question, unless Grace, you want. Yeah, I'll start. I'll start as
Yeah,
well.
you go for
So
it.
I think when I like from as a student, a PhD student, all the way to current, there's always the feedback from my collaborators as well as my mentors that you really should be telling a story. And so, what that means is that you should really be explaining why this is important on a grand scale, and then kind of going to funnel route as to where your idea then comes down to. And your executive summary, which is usually a one pager, if that's required, that's really like saying that first paragraph of like, this is the significance globally, nationally, however you want to see it, and why this is important to study, and then kind of honing in on your specific research question. I think that in regards to techniques, it's really in how you're writing. And really how you're telling that story from when you're writing the scientific strategy or like the background of thinking of what is my story? Like, why is this important? So for my own research, I do some research in health risk behaviors in adolescents, and how discrimination may impact those health risk behaviors. And so I've been focusing on Black and Brown adolescents in the United States. And so to be honest, I really talk about how discrimination is uh, quite relevant and significant for Black and Brown adolescents in the academic setting, in their school settings, with police officers, providing statistics. And then I say, and it does impact their stress levels, and how they respond to stress developmentally. They're in a place where they're going to be looking to develop their identity, and how that is based on their interpersonal relationships and interactions. And if they're having interactions with people they know and don't know as it relates to discrimination, it's going to impact how they perceive themselves in the world, as well as their different levels of stress. And so, in order to look at how um, their stress as it relates to discrimination influences certain behaviors, I'm going to evaluate, I'm going to do a study in which I do interviews and or some real-time analyses of seeing if when they have more experiences, if it predicts health risk behaviors. That's a very broad, but like if you can see, it's like a storytelling that's happening, and there's a couple of missing pieces there, which if I had more time to articulate it, I would. But you see how it's a story, and it's going to like why I'm doing what I'm doing and the importance of it. And so that's what I think the storytelling means and why it's essential, because you're going to have people who are reading your proposal who it's not their area of expertise, and they are like, why is this important? Like, who cares? Like my mentors always said, you need to explain to someone why they should care, and it has to be in a engaging way. If you don't catch their attention, you're done. Like, they want to be able to read and say, this is important, even though I know nothing about it. I can see why it would be important to fund this, and I can see how this project is going to address this problem. And it's very clear and concise. And if you can't do that from the very beginning, then you've lost them. And that means you've lost funding. Dr. Rivera, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, that sounded great. I was going to add that importance of that strong hook in that first line, which you had just touched on the end there, that you want that first sentence, just like the first sentence of a novel, to really grab someone's attention and make them want to read more. And then I think one other piece that I got a lot of feedback about when I got my proposal reviewed was making sure to be specific in places where you might think as the writer it's obvious. So I'll be talking about, oh, we've seen effects in students, or well, which students? What were the samples? Are we talking about high school students? Are we talking about college students? Making sure to be really specific when you, even if you've said it before already in the grant, that to not use the kind of crutch language of like broad language like they, or uh, kind of using language like people in general. You want to be as specific as you can so they know like who exactly you're working with and who you're referring to in each time. And so that's something that's easy as a writer to kind of go into just using the easiest word, but making sure that you're being specific is super important. And that's true, I think, in storytelling and writing too.
I
Great,
want to
thank you
just
very
add quickly too that it can be really important throughout the your writing to use sort of what we call like signaling or signposting language. So starting your sentences with things like, the consequence of this will be, or the significance of this is, and just making it really obvious, especially for your non-expert reader. It's, phrases like this will kind of cue your reader. It's just kind of part of the psychology of reading to say like, okay, they're about to say something important, right? So using those kinds of phrases like here's the expected outcome, here's the significance of this. This is important because da 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 da. Your reader will really hone in on those kinds of phrases. Again, especially your non-expert reader who's who's not necessarily familiar with the background of any of this or the project itself, and will kind of guide them throughout to sort of know kind of where the really kind of key ideas are. And even bolding terms is a strategy that people use. So bolding important phrases or important keywords in your proposal can really, again, kind of just visually help your reader to say, oh, okay, this is important. I'm going to focus my attention here. So that's kind of one of those like subtle, reader psychology tips that can kind of, storytelling techniques that can kind of help guide your reader through your proposal a little bit more easily.
Great. Thank you all. We got one more question for you, and I think this may be our last question that we're able to address live. But it's suggested that you get feedback or extra eyes on your application prior to submission. We talked about that today throughout the presentation. How do you handle that, especially when it's for a pilot funding and there is concern that someone may steal your idea? Do you have any tips, thoughts?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you want me to take the first pass at this? Okay, yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I think was helpful for me was identifying that grant writing cohort that I could work with. So looking to see if there are institutional for me, it was an institutional resource where they kind of reached out to early career researchers and asked if we wanted to kind of apply for this cohort. And so in that situation, there's elements of kind of vulnerability in that we're all sharing our proposals with each other. We're doing this peer review in a structured setting, and everyone has kind of signed on to be part of this community. And there may even be the ability to have like a sort of code of ethics before that people think about like, yeah, this work is for here, we're peer reviewing here to help each other. Please don't share any of this outside of this space. And that was communicated to us at the start of that grant writing cohort that, we shouldn't share any materials that we were receiving outside of this space. Because of some of these concerns. So that was a space that made me feel really comfortable. And then another tip might be reaching out to people within your networks that you do trust already and are comfortable with. So if you have a friend who's in another discipline that you want to look over your idea, that might be someone that you trusted already. So that's where I've gone to in thinking about this. So those are spaces I think there might be a little bit of built-in kind of accountability.
Yeah, I think this is a real issue in academia and in research, and it's going with your gut instinct. And also, I think if you not only what Dr. Rivera mentioned, I would like to add, if you have mentors and collaborators, that are a part of the work that you're doing. And it is pilot funding to get their feedback on it. Um, and I think that varies. There are some mentors who will steal their mentees' ideas and write a big grant and get funded for it because they've already been funded before. And I've seen that happen to peers, unfortunately. So it is a real thing. And depending on your discipline and who your mentors are, collaborators are, that is a big concern. And at the same time, I think it's important to um, find individuals that you can trust who hopefully will then become your collaborators, and they can be the ones to give you some peer feedback. Um, so that would be my additional recommendation.
Great. Thank you for that. And unfortunately, we are at time now. So first, I wanted to thank everybody who is attending, and everyone who's attending live, and of course, anyone who may be watching the recording. It's great to have you. And a huge thank you to all of our speakers today, to Doctors Katyal, Rivera, Tinkle, and Jenny Mathis. I appreciate all of your insights, and our audience definitely does as well. So for everyone, thank you very much. Hope to see you in a future webinar. But in the meantime, please take care. Bye.